guys, and welcome back. So in today's video I'm going to be doing a self-portrait in watercolor, and I've already sketched out in my Prismacolor Col-Erase colored pencil in Rose on my fluid 9x12 cold press watercolor block. So the portrait for today is supposed to be a yearly thing that I do around the start of the year to kind of see where my art style is at and what I look like at the time. And so this year I put it off for a while, wonder why that is, and this June I thought it might be fun to do one for my birthday, and so that's what this is. And then for the spring semester of 2020 I was actually in my first figure drawing class, and we got to do a lot of realistic portrait sketching because once we went to online learning, one of the assignments was to do a 10-minute realistic figure portrait for every day of the week. Weekends, we had off or whatever, but we had to turn in 5 realistic portrait sketches at the end of every week on the days that we had class. And so I wanted to use the skills that I learned in that class to be able to do a realistic portrait for this year. Now, if you've seen me in some of my other videos, I feel like there are some parts of this that look like me and other parts that I definitely did stylize, however unintentionally that might be. But I did actually use my little IKEA mirror and drew the first part of this from life. And then when I was done drawing that first night that I had sketched, I had taken photos of myself in the outfit and the way my hair was and everything at that time, so I could still work with the same lighting conditions. Now you might have seen me just then for the hair go in and add yellow at the top and pink at the bottom. This is because I kind of wanted to find a better way to translate my highlights and pink hair than like painting in chunks of it, if that makes sense. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go in and do the hair all brown and then just have it showing through, or be able to build up upon those tones that I'd already put in at the top and bottom. But I do actually have the most pink hair I've ever had. This actually is already out of date because I got bangs. Very cute, I like them a lot. I haven't had bangs since high school, middle school. It's been a hot minute, but it's very weird to like see my forehead in this, even though it's a drawing. The dress is actually one that I own, and I specifically didn't bring it in to reference from because the actual dress is very much patterned and it's very detailed, and I knew for a fact that I would spend forever on it when it would actually just distract from the face because, composition, I didn't want to actually take away from my figure's face, which is supposed to be the main focal point of the piece, by adding detail and contrast somewhere else, because I would have then had to compensate in the face and things would have just gotten a little weird. I worked over this piece over a few days, and I think you can kind of see when that is because the light does change ever so slightly, but I had a really good time working on it. I was really starting to get into the swing of things as far as doing full watercolor, and I think I ended up deciding that this paper is just not my favorite. Like, I like it and I think it's cool, but I think I would take it off of the block because as much for all the hype that I heard, like when I was first starting to do watercolor and learning more about it, it doesn't really hold it and prevent it from warping all that much. Like, my paintings that I tape down with masking tape on all 4 sides are flatter at the end than this one is that's like made to not warp. But I mean, all things considered, if I'm framing this or what have you, it doesn't entirely matter, and you can always flatten it by, wetting the back and putting some books on top of it, or even in some cases ironing it. I've never tried that one, but I've seen it done. But, to each his own, I guess. The paper itself is nice though. Now for the hair, I've gone in and added the shadows in that same hair color, and I'm glazing over it to try and keep everything in the same tones. Now that we're past the initial stages of laying down and rendering things, it's mostly just upping the contrast and glazing layers of color over each other until we reach the finished product. So we're coming up on one of my favorite parts of this piece, or any watercolor piece, and that's pulling out the really tiny brush to do shadows and detail work. I don't actually know what kind of brush this is, but I will put it down in the description box below. It's just a really small one, and basically I use it to add in any really dark areas, and it's great for doing small blending. I actually first saw a similar thing with Alyssa Draws. I will link her channel down below as well, but she uses a really small brush for watercolor, whereas I normally use anywhere from a 4 to 6 round to do pretty much everything. And there's a lot to be said for using the proper brush size for the proper thing. Things to try. Who would have suspected that using one of the many different brush sizes actually might have, you know, some thought behind it? But I did end up styling my eyelashes a little bit here because there's only so detailed you can make eyelashes on a painting without it being weird, but I still really like the way it turned out. So I don't know, it kind of reminds me of like a mix between my style and realism, which is kind of what I do anyway, but I don't know, I think you see what I'm getting at, and I do feel like they kind of look like my eyelashes. At this point, I'm really just kind of standing back and looking at this and squinting to see how much value I still need to add. And this is a very light painting. The real only big contrast is in the facial features, which I like, but I did realize that the hair does need to be darker, and so here we are just glazing all that down, making the striping of the shadow layer a little less obvious, and then going in and defining the shape of the necklace. And now that we're past the building up of colors stage and we're basically doing final rendering and things like that, I'm going in and adding the few freckles that I could notice in the photos in the mirror. One of the other things I really wanted to make sure I got here was defining each area. This is something that we should be doing overall, but I was looking over and like, all right, do the eyes have volume? No? Okay, and then glazing over that to add more interest. I also added in the eyeshadow I was wearing and then forgot about. A lot of these final steps are done with colors that are already on my palette and have been mixed and dried over the last few days, but just adding those final pieces of detail and rendering that are really going to make the final thing look realistic. And then it was time for one final darkening of that blue dress. And then we headed on to final details with my white gel pen. This one in particular is the UM153 white gel pen, and I'm actually using that really small brush to blend out areas that I'm putting down. So this is good for really soft highlights, and then you can even put the gel pen on a separate sheet and then use water to dilute it if you don't have gouache or something similar. And then here is the finished piece. I really enjoyed painting this, and even though I'm not going to use it as my icon, I hope that you enjoyed seeing the process behind it, and that you'll stick around if you want to see all of the new art videos I have cooking up. And I will see you in the next one, alright? Bye!